Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see you all. Thank you for having me. I don't know if you've ever met any celebrities. It's quite hard to define what a celebrity is these days, isn't it? But two of them were snooker players, which is a bit weird. It wasn't planned, it just happened. One was Jimmy White. I met him on Preston Station. Well, I didn't really meet him. I happened to be standing next to him, and then I realised who he was. So that's going back a few years. And the other one was Mark Williams, and I met him at Manchester Airport. And he was sitting on a seat waiting for a plane that was delayed. I met Michael Palin once on a train in London and had a natter with him. But there was somebody else I met who was of particular interest to me, and I've chosen to mention him because we're going to read in a few moments from Psalm 24. So if you've got a Bible, turn up Psalm 24. Are you all kind of converted to the same version of the Bible, or do you pick and choose and have your favourites and so on? I'm going to read this morning from Psalm 24 as it's found in the New King James Version, but it's very similar in all the versions. But it raises this question: who may ascend the hill of the Lord, and who may stand in his holy place? So that's one of the challenging questions in this psalm. The other celebrity I met was a man called Chris Bonington. He is a great mountaineer. He's still alive. I think he's kind of in his mid-80s now. But in 1975, he led the first expedition up Mount Everest by the route, which is the southwest face, which was the really hard one. Nobody had done that before, and he led this team up. And in order to accomplish that incredible feat, it required not just great planning, but kind of very special experience and qualification on his part. And he's a really nice bloke. We had quite a long chat on a train journey once that he happened to be sitting in the seat opposite me. But it made me think about this psalm and the way in which this question comes to us in verse 3. Who may ascend the hill of the Lord? Who may stand in the holy place? You see, each one of us is one day going to be confronted by the reality of God in a way that we've never known it now. Even as Christians, our knowledge of God is very patchy, very inadequate, very limited. Our minds are so easily distracted by trivial things when we try to think about God, aren't they? Even now, some of your minds are beginning to go off in all sorts of directions. The preacher's great battle is to keep the attention of his hearers. So, how well equipped are you to stand in God's holy presence? It's a big question, isn't it? Let's read the psalm, and then we'll come back to it in a moment, this subject. The earth is the Lord's, and all its fullness, the world and those who dwell therein. For he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the waters. Who may ascend into the hill of the Lord, or who may stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not lifted up his soul to an idol, nor sworn deceitfully, he shall receive blessing from the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation. This is Jacob, the generation of those who seek him, who seek your face. Lift up your heads, O you gates, and be lifted up, you everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord, strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O you gates. Lift up, you everlasting doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. I'll just reach for my proper notes. Oops. So, Psalm 24. The advantage of Psalm 24 is it's pretty short, but it doesn't mean it's not significant and full of really interesting lines of thought that we probably need to reflect on more often than we do. That's true of all the shorter psalms, isn't it? We kind of know them a little bit, but sometimes it's good to kind of dig down into them and really try and get at something of what they're all about. If you wanted a little title for this talk this morning, it would be Worship in 3D. By that I mean worship in 3 dimensions. And we'll come to that in a moment. There are 3 headings, and each one leads on to the next. Now, just to sort of set the scene a little bit, again, there are all sorts of drinks on the market these days, aren't there? Not long ago I was in a cafe, and the menu offered something they called infusions. Well, as far as I was concerned, infusion quickly became confusion, and I ended up with an Americano. But the Bible is a book which is infused, saturated with the reality and the presence of God. And we need to grasp that, because God is so easily undervalued, isn't he, in our day? Christians find it very hard to express just how great their knowledge of God is, even as limited, fallen human beings who've come to faith in Christ. We know we're swimming in deep water, aren't we? Trying to communicate how great God is to an ignorant and godless and generally secularized and atheistic culture. And the Psalms are full of what we call theology. They're not just little poems to sort of cheer us up on the journey. They're full of the knowledge of God. The Old Testament is packed with information about who God really is. And of course, that's all in preparation for the coming of God himself in the person of Jesus Christ. Anything that's true about God in the Old Testament is magnificently true in Jesus himself. He is God in human form, in every sense of the word. Now, as we come to this psalm, I hope you'll notice that there is a sort of a progression. It starts, "The earth is the Lord and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell in it." So the first thing really is God's involvement in the material and the physical creation. And then it moves on, verse 3, to what we could call his involvement in the moral and spiritual order of things. Who may ascend the hill of the Lord, and who may stand in his holy place? We move there from material to spiritual and moral and ethical. It raises questions about our character, doesn't it? The sort of people we are, and whether or not we are in a fit state to approach God and have dealings with him. And then the third thing is, we could say, I suppose the third dimension is, it takes us to the heavenly and the eternal. "Lift up your heads, O your gates, and be lifted up, you everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in." Who is this King of glory? It's the picture of someone who's a mighty conqueror entering into a city in triumph and splendor and majesty, with some great victory behind him, and everybody kind of welcoming him in and being amazed at the greatness of his achievements. And that's where the ground shifts, of course, away from us, if we are included in the earlier part of the psalm, to someone greater than us. The fulfillment of all our aspirations and all our failings, in a sense, in that he makes up for where we fall short so often. So that's kind of the structure of the psalm. And it begins really by reminding us, doesn't it, that God is the creator. "The earth is the Lord's and its fullness, the world and those who dwell therein." Now, that's a great statement, and it's a statement which really kind of puts us on collision course with our present world, doesn't it? Because our world doesn't really want to admit that. And there are all sorts of alternative views that have been conceived and handed on and kind of embedded in society, which rule God out completely on that account. We're kind of in an environment which has chosen to believe things which have very little scientific basis, actually, although they're kind of dressed up in scientific terms. For example, I came across a book the other day, and it said, "The Wonder of 5 billion Years of History." Now, that's a completely meaningless number. We cannot even begin to comprehend the the idea of 5 billion years, and yet it's thrown out. It strikes me, you see, that the more time you add to the whole question of your worldview, the further God seems to recede into the distance and you don't have to bother with him. But many huge numbers of scientists who are not Christians would dispute that kind of bold and rather almost flippant statement, which has no basis whatsoever in fact. This psalm tells us that this world is not just a meaningless blob. It has a place in a meaningful universe created by a personal God who governs time and space, who always acts with purpose, and his actions are determined by his character, which is loving and good and morally pure. Furthermore, he doesn't just create things and then walk away. He's not some absent landlord leaving the students to trash the flat. He didn't abandon it when Adam crashed the car. He is involved in every facet of life today. He's on the case in every sense of the word. Do you know your thoughts are measured by him 24/7, recorded? Every one of our lives is on file. And God knows us through and through. He's infinite in his capacity to retain information, to process it, and to judge it. There is no limit to his understanding. He has made us in his image, so in a sense we do have some likeness to him. And when you meet somebody who's really clever, I know a few people who are so clever that I just feel dwarfed in their presence. Usually people who are really clever don't flaunt it, do they? They don't need to. But really clever people who've got incredible knowledge and usually many letters after their names are very often the most humble, because they realise how much more there is to know. And measured against this great God, we're like ants, aren't we? And even the evil acts that human beings perpetrate are included and can play a part in his overall plan. He's bigger than all our problems and all the problems that we create. Psalm 74 says, God is our King of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. With all the mess that you and I make of our little lives, don't we make a mess of things? Even a good day is tainted, isn't it? And bad days we just want to forget about. But God is working in the midst of all that. It's quite encouraging, actually, that we don't derail God's plans because of stupid things that we do. God is well in control. And so we read in Romans chapter 8, that great passage, that God works all things together for good to those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And we find examples of that in the Bible. Even really bad stuff is included. I mean, the worst thing, of course, is the arrest and torture and crucifixion of Jesus, isn't it? The greatest crime in history. And yet it was absolutely central to God's plan for the world in the longer term. So let's just think again a little bit about this statement, the earth is the Lord's. This is the key to a legitimate, well, to use a fancy word, cosmology, perhaps we could say worldview. But as soon as you make this claim, of course, people really think you're a bit bonkers. They think, oh, that's a bit old-fashioned. You don't believe all that business about Adam and Eve, do you? It was quite good on the Radio 4 service this morning. It was from Keswick Convention, which was good. And they dared to read Genesis chapter 3, which is pretty good these days to get that out there, because, of course, most public church stuff is kind of, not to offend anybody or rock the boat. It's keep as many people as possible happy so that they come to church. That wasn't on that line at all. It was about the fall, about a snake that spoke and fruit that was eaten, actually eaten, not a myth, not a legend, a historical event. Wow, that's radical. And it cuts right across this idea that if you add time and space together and something in the middle, you produce a butterfly's wing. Do you know, it's interesting that Donald MacLeod, who's a great theologian, I think I've got time to read this little bit. It's really quite interesting. Let me just read this to you, because he'll say it better than I could. It's widely believed that there is a virtually infinite number of possible answers to the question, what existed before this world? Right? So the question, what existed before this world, is taking on this idea of evolution and so on. Well, the first view, in fact, there are only three. Not an infinite number, only three. The first is that before this world, nothing existed. Absolutely nothing. Now just contemplate that. Where did this world come from? From nothing. Where did the brain of Einstein or the brain of Shakespeare come from, or the brain of Mozart? Nothing. That's the first option. Everything came from nothing. The second possibility is that before creation, an impersonal something existed. A great, incredibly dense, shall we say, lump. A mass or energy, self-existent, eternal and pre-programmed. It had in it the atomic number of every element. It had in it every genetic blueprint. It had in it the score of Beethoven's symphonies. It had in it the plot of Hamlet. All of this was in the lump. Such a postulate is as offensive to the radically sceptical intellect as the existence of God himself. The third possibility is that before creation there was a personal something, the living God, an infinite mind, infinite wisdom, infinite power, and infinite love that explain all other forms of existence. That is the Christian doctrine, and what we face is a straightforward choice between this one thing, on the one hand, and nothing, or the lump, on the other. So where do you stand on that? Everything from nothing, everything from a lump, gas, not even as defined as gas, some kind of dark hole or black hole, and everything came from that? That's what we're being asked to believe. But this psalm underlines the notion of a personal creator God, a God who acts for our good. What's your favourite place that you've ever been to? Think of your favourite holiday, or the best holiday you had, or some place you maybe went on a business trip and it was amazing. You didn't expect it, and it's kind of imprinted on your memory. I guess some of you have been to a wonderful garden. Well, when we think of the world as it was before the fall, we're being presented with something which reflects God's nature. So you think of all the beautiful things. A while back we took one of our grandsons to the Bristol Zoo, and he was amazed at the height of a giraffe. He's about 5, and he was that high, sort of. I can't remember. Well, they grow very quickly, don't they? But anyway, this giraffe was just, well, it wouldn't have fitted in here. If one came in here, it would be having to bend over. It was incredible. And do you know what it was doing? It was eating dried sticks, dried twigs, and it was very happy eating those. Somehow it can get nourishment from things that you would put on your bonfire. Amazing animal. And it looked so pristine. Its fur was so delicate, and it has these incredible ears, and then these funny little horn things, and these great big eyes, and the eyelashes you ladies would die for. They were amazing. And my little grandson, I just couldn't believe what he was looking at. Why did God build giraffes? Why did he toss them into the creation? To show us something of himself. And we have the hummingbird, whose wings beat 90 to 100 times per second. the blue whale, which suckles its calf in such a way, the anatomy is so designed that the milk is never tainted with salt water. What a thought, eh? How do you do that? You know, swimming for 5 minutes in the sea, you're almost killing yourself, the amount of stuff that goes in your mouth. But a baby whale never absorbs salt water when it suckles its mother. The giant redwood tree, 380 feet high. And then on the other hand, the freshly picked peach. The peregrine falcon. He talked about the guys who are coming with their motorbikes next week. There's a thing called the Suzuki Hayabusa. It's a Japanese word for peregrine falcon, because a peregrine falcon flies at 180 miles an hour, and that's the speed of this Suzuki superbike. But Genesis doesn't just place us in the world as dumb spectators to go, wow. This is a way of drawing us toward himself as the source, as the creator of everything, and the giver of life and the sustainer of life, so that we can live from day to day. And we need to know what is our identity. God speaks to us in creation in order to give us a bridge, in a sense, into relationship with himself. And again, we have to remember we are never owners or creators. Only God is the creator. We're tenants and stewards of his world. And that's why it is important not to pollute the planet. It's important that we are careful in the way we use resources. The fact that the world is the way it is disturbing. I'm not minimizing it. But it doesn't mean it's somehow broken free from God's big story. God's timing is fine. He can manage the situation when we can't. And he will call time with this world when his purposes have reached that point. If you read Colossians chapter 1, there's a wonderful statement about the God who does all this, but who appears on earth in Christ. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation, for by him all things were created, whether things in heaven or things on earth, even in him. And all things are upheld by him. The Lord Jesus, who was born as a baby in a manger, is running the show. And he is in control. It's a complex business, isn't it? Running planet Earth. And then you throw in the rest of the cosmos as well, just for good measure. That actually kind of puts us in a difficult position, though, today, because all sorts of alternatives are being thrown out there as a better explanation. There are various political groups on the rampage in order to, well, I suppose in a sense, to try and engineer things in a different way. The so-called animal rights movement wants to wipe out the distinction between the animals and human beings. One outcome of this shift is the tolerance of abortion, but promotion of veganism. You know, the unborn child is of no consequence in our culture today, and yet vast numbers of people are getting very excited about whether we eat meat or not. Be very careful what you make the basis of your value system, because we are distinctly off the rails in so many areas. A lot of this kind of obsession with the planet, by the way, and it's a little bit of a digression, is actually an extension of some of the old religious heresies. Gnosticism, the Eastern religions such as Hinduism, in which a cow is valued more in India than millions of human beings who happen to be born in a low caste. I've been to India a couple of times, and drivers will swerve out of the way to avoid a cow in the street, but they would probably knock a kid off his bike in the process and think, well, I got it right. Okay? That's trendy Hinduism for you. And we are very confused in these times. We have radical feminism, transgender politics, Just Stop Oil, lots of neo-Marxist groups who are trying to overturn our Judeo-Christian heritage, our values which have been founded in God's truth, and to ridicule them and dismiss them, and often to caricature them in such a way as to make their case sound credible, but not if you probe a little bit beneath the surface. So be very careful what you buy into politically. In the light of this psalm, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Do you know, the Tower of Babel is a good reflection of modern society. The Tower of Babel is it's a good example of idolatry and the quest for utopia. The idea that somehow we can create some sort of heaven on earth, but on our terms. It's a very interesting story. It's a critique on modern society. God left out. Let us make a name for ourselves. That's how they kind of stated their case, wasn't it, there in the book of Genesis? But I must move on. So this world is God's world. We're not free to worship it, but we're not free to trash it either. Now the second dimension raises this question: who shall ascend into the hill of the Lord? And we move here now to this whole question of our moral identity. Because it goes on to say, doesn't it? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not lifted up his soul to an idol or sworn deceitfully, he shall receive blessing from the Lord. See, human beings are created not merely as functioning machines, but as morally accountable beings with a spiritual nature. That's why you are not just content to eat the same food every day, day after day at the same time. You like variety. You've been created with a perception of beauty and order, but also of the arts and things like that. You have a love to travel and to compare things and to visit places, to read literature, to listen to music. All those things are not just the product of time plus chance and the blob or the lump. They're the result of the fact that you are, in a sense, designed a little bit like God, who has all these qualities in himself as well, but to a much higher and more refined degree. We move then, as we see this, from the impersonal to the personal. The psalmist, in a sense, ups the stakes, doesn't he? And he also reminds us that we are morally accountable, that our behaviour is important. Not just in a sort of, in a practical sense, that we do better if we behave better, but in the sense that our true value is measured at different levels. Our true self is rooted in the nature of God himself. That's why you have a conscience. Let me try to get to the point. That's why you have a conscience. The conscience is the inner voice which tells you you ought to do better than you do. It's the voice inside your head or your spirit or your soul which approves and disapproves of your actions, not just other people's. We do that all the time, of course. We all make value judgments about everybody and anything, but we also do that about ourselves, don't we? Children are not quite so good at covering up their tracks as adults are. We learn to do it quite well as time goes on. But deep down we know we're not behaving in the way we ought to at a certain point in the day. That's because we're made in the image of God. And we exercise judgment like he does, but over ourselves. So as you look back over yesterday or last week, you'll be, if you're careful to do that, to weigh yourself up, you'll see there are areas where you fell short or behaved in a way which you knew was wrong, and that raises a question about what did you do about it? Because it's all here in this psalm, isn't it? Who may ascend the hill of the Lord, and who may stand in his holy place? Because the judgment that you impose upon yourself for your actions, day by day, week by week, is just a foretaste of the judgment that's coming when you meet with God. But the great thing about this psalm is it raises the question now so that you can respond to it in the right way. God doesn't leave you just to mess everything up and then find out that you did. He tells you in advance that this is the consequence of sin. But he does that not just to humiliate you and drag you down and depress you, but in order you might apply the remedy for sin before it becomes destructive. This morning I had to stop at Asda Pharmacy on the way through because I woke up in the night and I got a little thing on my lip which is going to be a cold sore. Has anybody ever had one? Don't get them. They really hurt. They're nasty. It's a little thing called a herpes virus. And if you've ever had chicken pox, it can break through again and again. So I went to the Asda Pharmacy and got this little tube of cream, which probably won't help much, but I thought I might try it. I've used it before. It doesn't really work. But the point is that I was aware, because of the pain in the lip, I was aware that action needed to be taken now, or as soon as possible. And when God makes you feel bad about yourself and things you've done, he's not doing that just to humiliate you and hurt you. He's doing it to awaken you to the fact that you need treatment. You need a remedy. You need someone to come and sort you out. You need a doctor. You need a healer. You need a saviour. So the question comes, who has clean hands and a pure heart? None of us do. Who has not lifted up his soul to an idol? Idolatry is all around us, not the religious sort that you see in the Old Testament, but in the car showrooms. And all those sorts of things that are constantly put before us as the key to happiness or fulfillment or a better standing in the eyes of your neighbours. And you could fill in the gap. We all know what our own weak points are. Some people have at least been interested in cars or bigger motorbikes. They're very interested in going around art galleries though. You just fill in the blank space according to your character. And then you'll see. I'm not saying you can't go around art galleries or buy a new car, don't get me wrong. What I'm saying is these things must not be the sole purpose for which we live. They are gifts to be received, and the giver is to be acknowledged. So we come under the microscope here, rather, don't we? Who may stand before God? Who can enter into his presence? Well, actually, none of us can, in and of ourselves. But the great God of this world and its design is the God who has come to the world. And this is where we come to the last part, because there's a kind of a change of tone, isn't there? It's like a symphony, this, and then suddenly there's this amazing theme at the end. So I can't expand all the details, but we move now to verse 7. Lift up your heads, O you gates. So the psalmist is, in a sense, he's been looking at creation, then he's been looking at humanity and testing it to see how it's doing, and it's not doing very well, actually, when we begin to look carefully. But then he shifts the focus to something far greater than either of those things, the material creation or the human creation. He turns our attention to this one, the King of Glory. And it's rather interesting, the poetry kind of goes like this. Lift up your heads, O you gates, and be lifted up, you everlasting doors, that the King of Glory shall come in. Now, the language is interesting. These gates, what does that mean? Well, a little bit of dipping into the commentators. Broadly speaking, it'd be something like this. Either the gatekeepers, because in ancient cities there would be gatekeepers, and they would check who was coming, who was approaching. They would have their lookouts and guards, and they would say, oh, he's 6'3", and he's got a chariot with gold paint on it, and he's coming along, and he's got 6 white horses. Oh yeah, we can have him, and he's one of our friends. But if you see 4,000 people with spears glittering, and they've got angry faces, and they're like this, no. The gatekeepers would give people the entrance ticket, in a sense. I suppose if you got the test match, you know, there are all these security people and so on. And they check your bag and that kind of thing. But then it might just be that the gates themselves are being personified. And it's all like, almost like a call to the gates, right? So these huge city gates, right? And the psalmist says, or shouts out to the gates, lift up your heads, O you gates, and be lifted up, you everlasting doors. It's like a call to the gates themselves to wake up. You know, they've been slumbering because nobody's come through the gates for a long time, and they think, oh, the gates we're not on duty, you know. And suddenly this amazing procession arrives with the King of Glory at the front. Come on, gates, get open. Does anybody know the song by Elbow? Throw these curtains wide, one day like this. Yeah? No? Okay, I'm showing my age. Right. But it's the idea of welcoming in the King, and everything has to stop to make this a special occasion. Lift up your heads, O you gates, be lifted up, you everlasting doors, and the King of Glory shall come in. Who is this King of Glory? The next bit's great as well. The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Jesus Christ is not just gentle Jesus, meek and mild. He's the destroyer. He's the destroyer of destruction and our enemies. For this purpose the Son of God appeared, that he might destroy the works of the devil. He's mighty in battle. I read a little anecdote that about 100 years ago, maybe 80 years ago, there was a great Christian thinker in a Princeton college in America, a theologian, and there was a big debate going on in the Presbyterian church of that time about some sort of theological question. It was in the balance, a bit like Church of England in chaos today, isn't it? They don't know what they believe anymore, so everybody's kind of saying, what about this, what about that? And they're all falling out with each other. And this woman, I think she was a wife of one of the faculty in this big Bible college, very important place in America, said, oh, I hear it's the big discussion today. I hope there will be peace. And this man said, it may not be a time for peace. It may be a time for war. And he was bang on, because somebody needed to spell out what was right and what was wrong. And there's a time for Christians to get engaged in battles as well as preaching peace. And sometimes we're going to be unpopular. If you're going to be a good Christian, your views will be unpopular, and sometimes things you say will be unpopular, because godly people will be persecuted as our culture unravels more and more and more. But thankfully there is one who's won the battle on our behalf, and he's going through the gates. Lift up, you everlasting doors, and the King of Glory shall come in. Who is this King of Glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of Glory. How are you and I ever going to stand in God's presence? Not on our own account. Not because we've ticked the boxes. Not because we're qualified. Not because we've passed the tests. But because we're relying on someone who was sent to take up our case, to represent us, to lead us through the gates into God's presence. We're all going to stand before God one day. Don't ridicule that idea, because you actually know it's true. Your conscience is appointed to that day when you will have to give account, and the things you've covered up and got away with will come to light on that day. The books will be open. They will. And your heart knows it. How are you going to stand on that day? You stand when you hold the hand of Christ, and his righteousness is imputed to you. By faith you receive a gift you never deserved. In him we are accepted. We're secure in union with Jesus Christ. He enters into the highest place, but with our names on his heart and imprinted on his hands. And if you're trusting Jesus and nothing else, you'll be safe, even when you meet up with this holy God who we've been thinking about this morning. The future is guaranteed because Jesus is alive, exalted, and coming again. We need to take to heart the words of some of these songs. They're good songs today. Let me close with some words from 2 Samuel chapter 23. It's a rather interesting little part of the Bible. 2 Samuel chapter 23. This is a very interesting chapter. For those who maybe, here's a bit of homework for you. If you like tying bits of Bible together. So you've heard a sermon from Psalm 24. I've dropped in a few sort of little time bombs about yourself and God and Christ. Maybe go to 2 Samuel, because this is the end of David's life. And David was a great spiritual leader and king. He had his faults, but he was a great king. And God loved him, and God commends him for his devotion to the Lord all his days. But he was not the perfect king. He's appointed to one who was would be even greater. So let me just read this little bit. The Spirit of the Lord spoke by me. This is verse 2 Samuel 23. The Spirit of the Lord spoke by me, and his word was on my tongue. The God of Israel said, the Rock of Israel spoke to me. He who rules over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God. And he shall be like the light of the morning when the sun rises, a morning without clouds, like the tender grass springing up to the earth by clear shining after rain. Although my house is not so with God, yet he has made with me an everlasting covenant, ordered in all things and sure. For this is all my salvation and all my desire. He will not make it increase, but the sons of rebellion shall be thorns thrust away. What David is basically saying is that even on my best day, I don't measure up. But God has provided somebody to stand in for me. The seed of David, as he's called. The one who would be descended from David, but who would come to represent us as we seek to approach a holy God and have dealings with him. One who would be our mediator. One who would be the King of kings and yet the servant of the poor. This amazing person, no one like him in all of history. God himself took human form and walked this earth to pick up the pieces of our scrappy lives and to repair us and put us back together and give us a future and a hope. There's no other answer to your great need. What's your greatest need? The greatest need is to be right with God, and this is the way. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell in it. He's established it upon the seas and upon the floods. Who shall ascend into the hill of the Lord? Who will stand in his holy place? None of us in our own strength. Lift up your heads, O you gates. Be lifted up, you everlasting doors, and the King of glory will come in. And when the King comes in, then all his people follow. Thank you for listening. As we sing this morning, ours is just a fragment of the praise which is going up to the throne of heaven from all over this planet. We're in a little field in a small county. It's called Suffolk. But we are loved by the Creator of everything and called to reflect his praise and his glory. Lord, we thank you for the privilege of being here with your word open before us, the good news flowing out from it to our hearts. Thank you that it's all brought together in this one, the King of glory, who entered through the gates, raised from the dead, having atoned for all our sin through the sacrifice of himself and his precious shed blood. Justified by faith, we now lift up our heads before you and bring you our worship today in his name.